Hi everyone. So today we're looking at some footage taken by our ROV Polaris during our Science Literacy Week event. So this is all taken right at the Halifax Harborfront, right by those lampposts, and this is all footage of the intertidal zone of Halifax, which as you can see is very diverse. So the first thing you might realize is those schools of fish that you see swimming around. So I've done some research on these fish, and I've come to the conclusion that I really don't know what these guys are. So my best guesses are either juvenile Acadian redfish or Atlantic perch. So if you'll note those sleek, slender bodies, those are very different from the redfish who usually have more spiky fins. And what's interesting is both of the species I mentioned before are usually deep water animals. So it's interesting that these are so shallow. So if anybody has any idea what those are, please leave them in a comment below. I'd love to hear your ideas. The next thing you might be able to notice are some sea stars. So these are definitely a staple in the intertidal zone. These guys are related to the sand dollar and the sea urchin. And despite what they might look like, they're actually a very fierce predator, and they feed mostly on blue mussels. You only really see them deeper down like this. They can't survive out of the water for very long. And right here, right in the middle of the screen, you can see a yellow one that's pretty arched. It's got like a little bulb in the middle. And that's because it's actually feeding on a blue mussel right now. So what these guys can do is they can actually insert their stomachs into the mussel shell, and they use that to insert their digestive juices and then digest the mussel from within inside its own shell. So that's a really, really cool adaptation that they have. So now what we see is some wooden slats that are just at the bottom of the sea floor. My best guess is that these got accidentally dropped in or something, but have now since been taken over or from the intertidal. You can see a bunch of kelp has grown around it with some sea stars and a few more of those fish that we saw earlier. And now here we see some kelp, which is a key vegetation of the intertidal. So these guys have really, really strong holdfasts, which are kind of like roots, except they don't take up nutrients. They're very exclusively used for keeping the kelp steadied to the ocean floor. And those are attached to a stipe, which are these pinkish red things that you see. Those are the stems of the kelp, and super, super large blades, which are the big, huge leaves that you guys can see. And these provide photosynthesis for the plant, and they're very adept at gas exchange, and they're very covered in algae and minerals from all the activity that's going around in the intertidal zone. The next thing you'll be able to see is a bunch of these little crab guys. So these are commonly known as the Jonah crab, and they inhabit the coastal waters of the North Atlantic, just like this. So these guys are very commonly known to move offshore in fall and winter, which is why you see so many of them underwater now. But the females move on land to lay eggs during spring and summer. So in those warmer months, you'll probably see them more on beaches and rocks. But these also eat blue mussels as well. So just like the sea stars, they can also feed mostly on these mussels, but they also eat snails, algae, and other arthropods like themselves. So that's kind of interesting about them. And you'll see that in the middle of those sea stars and crabs, they are on top of a bed of blue mussels. So those guys are extremely common here in Nova Scotia. And as said, they provide food for many of the intertidal predators. And you're more likely to see these guys out of the water since they have adapted to do that to avoid predation. Because they can hold a tiny bit of water inside their shells to keep them from drying out. And they use something called byssal threads, which they create from inside their bodies to attach to things to protect them from wave action. So they usually congregate in these mussel beds to keep cool and reduce surface area. All right, and then we're moving back here, and you can actually see some of these sea stars falling down, like a little sea star rain. So one thing I want to point out is Polaris is actually really, really hard to drive. One of our special guests one time came on and described it as walking a dog from a helicopter. So it's really, really hard to see on that little screen that we're given where we're going, but it is really important that we make sure we're not causing too much damage to the intertidal zone since it is such a key aspect of our environment. All right, and we're driving through the intertidal again. And one thing you might notice is that sometimes a fish will flit away from the ROV, or Polaris will get really close to a blade of the kelp, and then it'll throw up some of that particulate that's lying on it. And that's because Polaris actually moves using little motors attached to it that helps it move up and down and left and right. So it sends a tiny little current, which doesn't cause any damage, but does cause some of that particulate matter to fly up, just like you're seeing right now. So it's just because of those little tiny motors. What you can see now is some sea stars, and you'll notice that not all of them have legs. Some of them are missing the one leg or have a tiny little limb, and that's because sea stars can actually grow back their limbs once they lose them. So if they lose them from a predator, or if they just get caught somewhere and one of them happens to fall off, it's not even a big deal because they can just grow them right back. So it's very, very cool. And then right now you can see a kelp forest, and that is really, really cool. And I like to think of them as the coral reefs of the Northern Atlantic. And that's because they provide safety and shelter for so many species in the ocean. And they help keep our oceans clean by taking in carbon dioxide and breathing out oxygen, which provides air to a lot of us and people and animals that live on land, as well as animals that breathe oxygen in the ocean. So this is actually just the top of the reef. We didn't want to go into it, so we didn't cause too much damage. But you can even see the diversity of species that live here. You can see all the kelp and all the algae. You can see some fish. So you can see how many things this provides homes for. It's very cool. So now we're reaching the edge of our kelp forest, and you can see a bit more of the sea floor. And you can see that it's covered in red algae, and you can see a ton of mussel shells. So one thing to point out about this bare seafloor is that not a lot of things can actually live here because it's so exposed, and it leaves them vulnerable to attack. So a lot of the things prefer to live within the kelp forests or in a more sheltered area. But right now, when you could see that little green stuff on the ground is something called sea lettuce, and that's actually an edible type of green algae. Like the kelp, these guys have a disc holdfast that helps them to withstand wave action in the intertidal zone. They don't grow very big, especially in open areas like this, but they are very nutritious if you can get your hands on them, since they don't grow very fast. So we are going back into another area of the kelp forest now. And what you might be able to notice just up here on the left is some blue stuff, which looks kind of cool, but I hate to inform you that it's just a piece of plastic. So this is a great reminder to make sure that since this is so close to the ocean here in Halifax, make sure that you're please putting your garbage and recycling where it belongs so it doesn't end up in ecosystems such as this. It's just a really, really important reminder. Make sure you're just being mindful. There's another little piece of blue that's just another plastic bag. It can actually wreak a lot of havoc on this area of the ocean. So please make sure that you're putting your garbage and recycling where it belongs. And I promise you, it does not belong in the ocean. So we're actually zooming through the kelp forest now, you can see, and there's a really, really neat shot of a very cool fish coming up. And I will point that out to you as we get there. Not quite there yet. It's going to be on the right side of the screen. Oh, there it is. So it's right in the middle. It's a brown fish just kind of laying on the ground. Right in the, yep, there it is. We just zoomed past it. It was camouflaging a little bit, so if you need to, you can go back and check it out again. But I also have no idea what this fish is. Everything that I saw about the Atlantic intertidal says that a fish like this doesn't really, or shouldn't really be in this area of the ocean. But again, if anyone has any idea what this might be, please let me know. So we're looking out at the open ocean, and we move down and we can see some more of that blue stuff. Again, looks like to me a fishing net or some other kind of plastic garbage. Luckily, we don't see any types of organisms caught there now, but it can be very detrimental to a lot of species that live in this area. So please, please, please put away your garbage in where it belongs, and do not cut off free fishing nets into the ocean. It is not good for it. Right, and then we're moving into the open ocean, and we are moving into a new ecosystem. So again, we see one of those little fish that we saw before. And we are going to move in, and you can see a Jonah Crab scuttling across the ocean floor just over there to the right. Fun fact about these guys is that they actually can't move forwards and backwards. They can only move side to side. And then right on the left, you can get a good view of a beer can, unfortunately. So, and again, really important, we're right by the ocean, so make sure that you or someone who you're with is not throwing their trash into the ocean. It's not good for the animals that live there. And it's really ruining our very beautiful shot of the ocean floor here. So make sure that you're not putting your garbage in the ocean. Although one more thing to point out is this footage did take place right after Hurricane Teddy, so there's a good chance that some of this garbage might have actually just got blown into the ocean as well. And there is beer can number 2 up there to the right. It's red, white, and blue. But more interestingly, right in the middle of the screen there, you can see a conglomerate of sea stars. Looks like there's about 5 or 6 of them all kind of holding hands. I'm not quite sure if this is some kind of mating ritual or if this is maybe a little competitive attack that's going on. But anyways, it is really cool to look at. I've never really seen anything like that before. So here we're heading into a new area, and our Polaris is going to go near the ocean floor, and you'll be able to see so many sea stars and crabs coming up right past this kelp. Yep, there you go. So many there. There's a whole bunch over there to the side. And if you notice and you look really closely, that's because we are right on top of a huge mussel bed. And obviously all the predators are going to go where the food is, so they're all gathered here to have a little bit of a feast on some mussels here. So this is footage from underneath the dock, as you can see that post there. And as I said before, a lot of creatures don't like to live in places where there's not a lot of kelp, but I imagine that the dock kind of gives them an impression of safety, so that's why you see a lot more of them living around here in this area, despite it not being the safest spot. But here you got a really, really nice shot of Jonah Crab in its natural habitat, and it's surrounded by more of those sea stars. So we're going to zoom in onto a sea star here on the left. As you can see, there's a bunch of them covering that post. And we're going to zoom down here. And as you can see, as we zoom in, you can see and this big one here, there's a bunch of tiny, tiny little feet that are at the bottom of the sea star, and they use these little guys to grip very tightly to the floor of the ocean so that they don't get knocked astray by wave action. So that's a really cool adaptation that sea stars also have to help them move around when there's lots of waves in this zone, because there definitely is. And we get one more really, really nice shot of all those sea stars on that mussel bed. There we go. So you see lots of full ones, but also lots of shells from ones that have been previously eaten by our crab and sea star friends. It's a big shot. You can see how many of them are. And then here is our last shot. So as you can see, there's a whole school of all those redfish that we talked about before. So once again, I don't know for sure what kind of fish these are. So maybe if you know a little bit more about them than I do, or if you know for sure exactly what they are, please leave a comment down below on what you think that they might be. But also, if you enjoyed this video, if you love watching the ROV footage, maybe consider giving us a little thumbs up so that we know for future videos. And if you really like science content and you like marine biology, oceanography stuff, please subscribe to our channel. We post lots of stuff like this. And I will see you guys in the next video. Thank you so much for joining me today.